A few weeks ago, I was scrolling through an online forum, one of those places where people were unironically discussing their perfect world. And one user's post, it really stuck with me. He didn't dream of like mansions or fame, nothing like that. He dreamed of a world where every single morning, a system would provide him with a pre-selected outfit and a nutritionally balanced meal. He described a life where his job was assigned to him based on his natural soul, and he'd never have to worry about a mortgage or a career crisis or even making a difficult decision ever again. He called it the ultimate peace. And his tone, it was almost reverent, as if he were describing this long-lost Eden. To him, the messy chaos of modern freedom, that was a curse. And a rigid, planned existence was the cure. He was genuinely convinced, truly believed, that if we just surrendered our individual wills to a perfectly rational system, all human suffering would just vanish. It was this vision of absolute harmony. But then someone in the comments asked a really simple question. They just said, what if you wake up one day and realize you hate the job the system gave you? The silence that followed in that thread was, well, it was chilling. And when the original poster finally replied, his answer was even more unsettling. He wrote, in a perfect society, the education would be so good that you'd never even think to want something else. You'd be happy because you'd have no other choice. That moment, that instantaneous shift from a dream of peace to, well, a blueprint for a cage, that is exactly where the word utopia loses all of its romance. We often use it to describe this beautiful, ideal world, but history and philosophy, they tell a much darker story. From Plato's philosopher kings who, treated humans like worker bees, to Thomas More's Utopia, where every house looked the same and no door had a lock. These perfect visions, they all share this terrifying common thread. They require the total suppression of the individual. So today we're going to look at why these beautiful dreams are so dangerously seductive, and why every time humanity tries to build a ladder to an earthly heaven, we somehow always end up paving a road straight to hell.
That silence in the thread you mentioned.
Yeah.
That is the sound of the human variable being subtracted from the equation. It's the silence of a machine humming along perfectly, because the glitch, which is us, our desires, our messiness, that's been removed.
And that's the terrifying part, isn't it? It's not that the system fails because it's broken. It fails for us because it works too well for the planner.
For the plan, yeah.
So we have a massive stack of research today to try and figure out why this specific fantasy, this desire for a totally friction-free life, is so dangerous. We're looking at political science reviews of James C. Scott. We've got cultural critiques from Christopher Lasch, dense theory on neoliberalism.
And even clinical studies on sexual violence in sports institutions.
Yes, which seems like an outlier, but it connects in a really chilling way.
It does. It's a diverse stack, but it all orbits around, I think, three main pillars. We're going to look at the structural failure of planning. Why trying to treat society like a geometry problem just leads to disaster. Then we're going to look at the psychological shift, how living in these systems actually changes our internal landscape, sort of turning us into narcissists. And finally, the ultimate betrayal, how the institutions we trust to protect us end up, well, preying on us.
Right. And the mission here, it isn't just to bash utopias, it's to understand why perfect systems produce miserable people. We want to get at how the pursuit of that ultimate peace that the forum user wanted, how that inevitably leads to fragility and deep, deep distrust.
Right. And to do that, we need to introduce a concept that is going to be our North Star for this first part of the deep dive: high modernism. This comes from the political scientist James C. Scott.
Before we get into the textbook definition, I want to ground this in something real, because high modernism sounds very abstract, very academic, but the consequences are incredibly human. I've been spending a lot of time lately looking through old documentaries and forum archives about the human cost of perfection. It's fascinating and honestly a bit haunting. I came across the story of a man named Merrick.
Okay, and this is from the mid-20th century, right? Yeah. In one of those Eastern Bloc plans.
Exactly. Merrick lived in one of those planned industrial towns designed specifically to embody the workers' utopia. This wasn't just a town, it was conceived as a machine for living. In Merrick's town, every single detail was engineered from the top down. The Central Committee decided that the old neighborhood pubs, the small, inefficient parish councils, they all had to go. They were seen as messy, regressive obstacles to a streamlined future.
Inefficient is the key word there, isn't it? From a player's perspective, a pub is just a place where people waste time and talk about things the state can't monitor or control.
So, try to imagine Merrick's life. He had a clean apartment, he had a guaranteed job. On paper, he had everything that forum user in my intro wanted.
The ultimate peace.
The ultimate peace. But the organic layers of his life, the local clubs where men argued about football, the charity groups that looked after the elderly, all of it was gone. It was all replaced by these sterile, official, state social centers. And eventually, Merrick described this feeling of profound anomie.
Anomie. That's an old sociology term from Durkheim. It means, what, normlessness? A lack of social cohesion?
Yeah, he described it as being disconnected and rootless.
Yeah.
Without those messy middle ground institutions to sort of anchor him, he wasn't a citizen anymore. He was just a component in a machine.
A part to be replaced.
Yeah. And reading Merrick's account, I couldn't help but feel this pang of sadness. We often think that removing the clutter of old traditions will make society run better, but as a journalist, I see this pattern everywhere. When you destroy the small local structures that people actually care about, you don't get a utopia, you get a lonely, alienated population. It's a classic structural failure where the view from the top just completely ignores the life at the bottom.
Merrick's experience is the emotional reality of high modernism. That's what it feels like to live inside it. And Scott's book, Seeing Like a State, it basically provides the blueprint for why Merrick felt that way. High modernism isn't just, liking technology or being modern. It's a very specific ideology that combines this unrestrained faith in science and rationality with an authoritarian willingness to use coercion to reshape society.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate with you for a second. Why is faith in science and rationality a bad thing? We like science. I like that my bridge doesn't collapse. I like that my traffic lights are timed. Why does Scott see this as a recipe for disaster?
That's the crucial distinction. Scott isn't against science at all. He's against what you could call scientism.
Okay.
It's the pretense of science applied to complex human systems. The bridge doesn't have a will of its own. Concrete doesn't wake up one morning and decide it wants to be a painter.
Right, but people do.
People do. The core problem that Scott identifies is a concept he calls legibility.
Legibility. Okay, break this down for me. Because usually that just means, can I read your handwriting?
Right. But in political science, legibility is the ability of the state to see, count, and organize its subjects. Think about a pre-modern forest. It's a total mess, right?
Yeah.
You have oak trees next to elms, tangled underbrush, winding paths that only the locals know.
Yeah, it's chaotic.
To a local villager, that forest is a resource. They know where the mushrooms grow. They know where to find firewood. They know where to hide. It's their life. But to the state, to the tax collector or the conscription officer, that forest is an absolute nightmare. It is illegible.
Okay.
You can't calculate the timber yield of a chaotic mess. You can't march an army through it easily. It's resistant to control.
So the chaos protects the local, but it frustrates the ruler, the person at the top.
Exactly. So what does the high modernist state do? And this actually happened, by the way, in Prussia and later in colonial forestry projects. They cut down the messy, diverse forests.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. And they plant neat, orderly rows of a single species, like identical Norway spruce trees. All the same age, same height, in perfect straight lines.
It looks like a spreadsheet.
It's a spreadsheet applied to nature. Now, the forest is legible. The state can calculate exactly how much lumber they will have in 10 years.
It looks perfect. It looks rational.
It looks perfect from a helicopter. But then disaster strikes.
Nature pushes back.
Of course, because they removed all the inefficient underbrush, the soil nutrient cycle collapsed. Because it was a monoculture, a single pest or disease could, and did, wipe out the entire forest. The scientific forest died. And that is the perfect metaphor for Merrick's town.
Because the planners removed the social underbrush.
Exactly. The pubs, the arguments about football, the weird little charity clubs, they couldn't control them, so they got rid of them. But those were the things keeping the society alive, keeping it resilient.
That is such a powerful image. The underbrush is what keeps the forest healthy, even if it looks messy to the guy in the helicopter.
And Scott identifies 4 elements that come together to make this fatal. First, you have the administrative ordering of nature and society that drive to make it legible. Second, the high modernist ideology, the sheer arrogance that says we can design a better world from scratch.
Right.
Third, you need an authoritarian state that is willing to force people into that design. And fourth, this is key, a prostrate civil society people who are too weak or disorganized to resist.
And that arrogance is so important. In the sources, there's this recurring theme that the planners basically think the people are stupid.
They view their subjects as incompetent.
Yeah.
They think, if we don't tell Merrick where to live and what to do, he'll just mess it up.
Yeah.
They lack what the Greeks called metis.
Metis. This is a Greek concept, right? How is that different from just knowledge?
The Greeks had 2 words for knowledge. There was techne, which is technical, book knowledge, physics, geometry, all the stuff the planner has in his toolkit. And then there was metis, which is more like cunning, practical, local knowledge. It's the kind of knowledge a ship captain has of the tides and currents, or a farmer has of his specific plot of land. It's learned by doing.
So techne is knowing the chemical composition of soil in a lab, but metis is knowing that the south corner of your field gets really muddy in April, so don't plant there.
Exactly. And you absolutely cannot run a society on techne alone. When you try, you get things like the Soviet collective farms.
Where millions starved.
Millions starved because the central planners in Moscow were dictating planting times that made zero sense for the local climate and soil conditions in Ukraine. They had the grand map, but they completely ignored the territory.
And it supplies to cities, too. We looked at sources on Brasilia and Chandigarh.
Oh, classic high modernist cities, designed by brilliant world-famous architects like Le Corbusier and Oscar Niemeyer. And from the air, they are absolutely stunning. Geometric, orderly, clean. The state's view is breathtaking.
But on the ground...
On the ground, for the people who live there, they're often nightmares. There are no corners.
No corners? What does that mean?
The urbanist Jane Jacobs talked about this.
Yeah.
A corner is where people bump into each other. It's where the bakery is next to the hardware store, is next to the newsstand. It's where life happens.
Spontaneous interaction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These planned cities, they separate everything by function.
Yeah.
Here's the living zone, here's the working zone, here's the shopping zone.
So you have to drive everywhere.
You have to drive everywhere. The streets are empty and windswept. It kills the spontaneous social interaction that makes a city a city. It creates that profound anomie that Merrick felt.
It's interesting because we usually associate this kind of top-down central planning stuff with communism or, heavy-handed socialism. But one of our sources, Chris Hedges, he throws a real wrench in that. He argues we are living in a kind of utopia right now.
Neoliberal utopia.
Yeah.
This is where we have to be careful with our own political biases, right? We tend to think free market means no planning. But Hedges argues that neoliberalism, which has been the dominant system of the West for the last 40 years, is just as much a utopian project as Soviet communism was.
That sounds like a contradiction. Isn't the whole point of the market about letting people do what they want?
In theory, that's the sales pitch. But in practice, creating a truly global free market requires massive state intervention. You have to rewrite laws, you have to break unions, you have to use international bodies to enforce patents and contracts. It doesn't just happen naturally.
So you're planning for a specific outcome.
You are. Hedges argues that neoliberalism is a class project masked as a market utopia. It promises that if we just unleash the market, efficiency and innovation will solve everything. It's the same one big idea logic as the high modernists.
So instead of the state planning committee in Moscow deciding everything, it's an abstract market logic that's supposed to decide everything.
And the result for the Marek of today is strikingly similar. Hedges talks about this process of accumulation by dispossession.
What's that?
It's a fancy way of saying we strip the assets of the public. We sell off the water company, we privatize the schools, we break the unions that protected wages.
The unions and the community centers and the local parishes. That was the social underbrush for the working class.
Neoliberalism cleared them out to make the economy more legible, for global capital to flow without friction.
So whether it's a commissar in a gray suit or a private equity guy in a Patagonia vest, if they are destroying your local community to make a spreadsheet look better, it's the same structural failure.
At its core, yes.
Yeah.
You end up with what Hedges calls a frustrated and enraged precariat.
The precariat, people in precarious work.
Right. People who feel the system is rigged against them because that protective covering of their local cultural institutions has been stripped away, leaving them totally exposed to social dislocation.
And when people are stripped of their community, when they feel that anomie, that rootlessness, they change psychologically. They don't just sit there and take it, they adapt. And this brings us to our second pillar, the architecture of the soul.
This is where we move from the physical town to the mental landscape. This is about what these systems do to us on the inside.
Right. I want to share another story that I think illustrates this perfectly. I saw this online recently from a young academic named Julian. Julian spent years climbing the ladder at a prestigious Ivy League university. He grew up believing in the old school idea of meritocracy, that if you were the smartest and you worked the hardest, you would earn your place. Simple as that.
The classic dream.
The classic dream. But as he moved into the modern professional world, he realized that the culture of narcissism that Christopher Lasch wrote about decades ago it had evolved into something different, something weirder. Julian noticed that his peers weren't really being rewarded for their research or their unique insights anymore. They were being rewarded for their ability to perform a very specific kind of radical ideological conformity.
Perform is the key word.
It was all a performance. And he saw it as a defensive strategy. Instead of building a solid self through real achievement, they were building a persona through alignment with the dominant ideology.
That distinction, building a self versus building a persona, that is absolutely critical.
Yeah. He described this one seminar where everyone in the room, including the professor, knew that the available data contradicted the utopian social theory being taught.
But everyone,
including himself, just nodded in agreement. The fear of being the nail that sticks out was stronger than the drive for truth. He saw it as a shift from individual excellence to a collective performance of correctness. And thinking about Julian's experience, I find it deeply unsettling. As someone who makes a living by, speaking my mind on camera, the idea of a world where we trade our authentic selves for the safety of a groupthink shield, it feels like a psychological prison. It's that defensive narcissism the framework warns us about, where we care more about looking right to our peers than actually being right or doing good work. It's such a hollow way to live.
Julian's story is a textbook case of what Christopher Lasch was predicting back in 1979 in The Culture of Narcissism. And we need to be really clear about what Lasch meant by narcissism, because people usually hear that word and think it just means having a big ego or taking too many selfies.
Right. We think of a reality TV star or something. But Lasch meant something much more subtle and much more pervasive, didn't he?
Oh, much more. For Lasch, narcissism is a defensive reaction to a world that feels unstable and out of control. When that social underbrush we talked about is gone, when you can't rely on your family, your church, your neighborhood to give you a solid sense of self, you feel incredibly vulnerable. The world feels hostile, so you retreat into the self.
It's a survival mechanism. You pull into your own shell.
Exactly. But because you have no solid foundation, that self is incredibly fragile. It's hollow. Lasch talks about the hall of mirrors.
The hall of mirrors.
Yeah. In a modern bureaucracy or a modern university, we don't produce tangible things like a farmer or a blacksmith does. We produce impressions. We manage people. We manage data. We write papers. So we need constant validation from others, from our peers, just to feel real. We need a reflection in their eyes to know who we are.
So Julian, in that seminar, he nods not because he actually agrees, but because he needs the group to reflect back to him his status as a smart, correct person. If he disagrees, he risks shattering his reflection in that mirror.
Lasch calls this bureaucratic dependence. We have lost the competence to do basic things for ourselves, so we become totally dependent on experts and institutions for everything. And this fosters a psychological dimension of dependence. We are terrified of being cast out, so we conform, we perform.
And this connects so directly to what we see happening in elite institutions today. We have a source here, a review by Daryl E. Paul of a book called We Have Never Been Woke by Musa Al-Gharbi. This analysis is fascinating because it argues that wokeness, or whatever label you want to put on modern social justice politics, isn't really about helping the poor or the marginalized.
No, Al-Gharbi's argument is that it's a status competition within the elite. He calls these people symbolic capitalists.
Symbolic capitalists. I love that term. It's perfect. People who trade in words and ideas and narratives.
And that's their currency. Think about it through the lens of a theory from Peter Turchin called elite overproduction.
Okay.
We are churning out way more PhDs, law graduates, journalists, and aspiring administrators than there are elite jobs for them.
It's a game of musical chairs.
It's a game of musical chairs, but there are 100 people and only 5 chairs. So the competition is ferocious.
It's absolutely lethal.
So how do you win in that environment? You can't just be smart. Everybody has the credentials. Everyone is smart. You have to find a way to disqualify your competitors.
You weaponize morality.
Exactly. You find a new moral framework. And if you can accuse the person currently sitting in the chair of violating that moral norm of being unsafe or problematic or unwoke, you can knock them off the chair and take it for yourself.
And that explains the intensity of the purity spirals we see in academia and media. It's not just about being good. It's about survival in a saturated marketplace for status.
And the currency in that marketplace is what Al-Gharbi calls totemic capital.
Totemic capital.
Right. Totemic capital is the currency of victimhood or proximity to victimhood. In this specific marketplace, having a marginalized identity or being the most vocal champion of a marginalized identity grants you what he calls epistemic authority.
Epistemic authority, the authority to know things.
Right. It means I have access to a special truth because of my identity, and therefore I know something you don't, and therefore I should be in charge.
It's a power move. It's not a plea for help. It's a bid for rule. It's a tool for navigating that vicious competition.
Which brings us to that Reddit philosophy thread we were looking at regarding Nietzsche, because they were having this exact debate. Is this slave morality or master morality?
Okay, quick philosophy refresher for everyone. Nietzsche said master morality is the morality of the strong. It values strength, excellence, nobility. It says good versus bad.
Right. And slave morality is born of resentment, which is this deep, curdled resentment of the strong. It inverts all those values. It says strength is evil, and weakness, suffering, victimhood. That is what's good.
So at first glance, wokeness looks like a classic slave morality. It attacks the powerful, it centers the victim, it inverts traditional hierarchies.
That's the obvious reading. But the interesting argument in that thread was that it has actually morphed into a new and very emphatic master morality.
So that seems counterintuitive.
Because it is incredibly dogmatic. It imposes its will. It says, you will use this language. You will accept this framework. You will nod in the seminar. That is the behavior of a master, not a slave. It's a new ruling class imposing its values.
That's a fascinating twist.
But Nietzsche would probably look at the whole thing, the obsession with safety, the avoidance of conflict, the desire for a friction-free world, and just see the last man.
The last man. That connects right back to my intro. The guy on the forum who wants the ultimate peace.
The last man is Nietzsche's ultimate nightmare. A human being who has no great aspirations, no desire to struggle or create or overcome. He just wants to be comfortable, safe, and warm.
He blinks and says, we have invented happiness.
It's the pet human, a human who has been fully domesticated, made safe and predictable.
And who is the master of the pet?
The institution, the system.
Which leads us directly to our final pillar. Because if we are going to surrender our autonomy, if we are going to become these symbolic capitalists fighting for scraps, we are doing it inside these massive structures. We trust them to hold the keys to the kingdom, but what happens when they betray that trust?
This is the most painful part of the analysis. Institutional betrayal.
Section 3, the collapse of trust. I want to introduce our third story here, and it's a powerful one. Try to imagine a veteran journalist named Sarah who worked for a major metropolitan newspaper for 30 years. I read an interview with her where she talked about the betrayal of the mission.
The mission of journalism itself.
Well, for most of her career, Sarah's North Star was what you'd call classical liberal values. Objectivity, hearing both sides, and a very healthy skepticism of all forms of power.
The old school Fourth Estate model. The watchdog.
Exactly. But she watched as the leadership at her paper and the elite universities where her new, younger colleagues were being recruited from began to systematically abandon those values in favor of social planning. They stopped reporting what was happening and started reporting what they thought should happen to bring about a more equitable utopia.
They saw themselves as activists first, journalists second.
And when she raised concerns about the factual gaps in their stories about ignoring inconvenient data, she was told that the greater good of the social goal outweighed the minor details of the truth.
That phrase, the greater good, that is the calling card of the utopian planner every single time.
The result? The public stopped trusting them. It was that simple. Sarah watched the circulation numbers plummet and the comment sections fill with vitriol. The elite institutions had betrayed the very trust that gave them power in the first place.
They burn their own credibility.
To the ground. And watching this unfold from my perspective as a content creator, I see the wreckage of that public trust every single day. When the people running our universities and newsrooms decide they are social engineers instead of truth seekers, they lose the moral authority to lead. It's a clinical collapse.
Yes.
And we're left in this world where nobody knows who to believe because the people who were supposed to be the adults in the room decided that their utopian fantasies were more important than the messy, complicated reality we actually live in.
Sarah's story is a perfect, painful example of institutional betrayal. This concept comes from psychological research by Carly Smith and Jennifer Freyd. And the definition is simple but absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
Institutional betrayal occurs when an institution causes harm to an individual who trusts or depends upon it.
And the research you're citing suggests this cuts deeper psychologically than just a normal betrayal.
Much deeper. If a stranger mugs you on the street, it's traumatic, of course, but it doesn't shatter your worldview. You didn't trust the stranger.
Right.
But if your university, your church, your team, or your newspaper lies to you, when the institution you depend on is the one that harms you. It destroys your sense of reality. It's a profound psychological wound.
We have some absolutely brutal examples of this from the world of sports. The sources detailed the cases of Kyle Beach in the NHL and the players in the National Women's Soccer League.
These are just harrowing cases. You have young athletes who are sexually abused by their coaches. They go to the institution, the team management, the league officials expecting protection. That's who you're supposed to go to.
But the institution doesn't protect them.
No. They protect the brand. They protect the winning record. They protect the abuser.
And they engage in this pattern called DARVO.
Yes, DARVO. It's an acronym, and it's a playbook for institutional abuse.
Okay.
It stands for Deny, Attack, and Reverse Victim and Offender. Let's just walk through it. Imagine you're a victim coming to me, the institution. First, I deny. That didn't happen. You're misremembering. The coach would never do that.
Right. Gaslighting.
Pure gaslighting. Then I attack. You're a troublemaker. You're just trying to get more playing time. You're not a team player. You're trying to distract us from the playoff.
Wow.
And finally, I reverse victim and offender. Actually, by making these false accusations, you are hurting the team. You are the problem here. The harm is what you're doing to us.
That is psychologically abusive to an incredible degree. It makes the victim question their own sanity.
And why do they do it? To protect the utopia of the winning team. In the Chicago Blackhawks case, they covered up Kyle Beach's abuse because they didn't want a scandal to ruin their run for the Stanley Cup. In the NWSL, they protected an abusive coach for years because he was a winner. The enterprise was more important than the human being.
And this connects perfectly to Sarah's media story through a concept from the philosopher Michael Oakeshott. He made this crucial distinction between a civil association and an enterprise association.
This is the key to understanding why public trust has completely collapsed. Think of a civil association, like a referee in a game of soccer. The referee doesn't care who wins. His only job is to enforce the neutral rules of the game. No handballs, no offsides. His entire authority comes from his neutrality, so the players can pursue their own goal, which is winning.
Okay, so he provides the framework. And an enterprise association.
The enterprise association is like the team itself. Everyone on the team has a single, shared, substantive goal. Win the game. Or in a company, make a profit.
So what happens when a newspaper or a university, which is supposed to be a referee, a civil association providing neutral rules for finding truth, decides it wants to change the world?
It becomes an enterprise association. It stops being a neutral arbiter of rules and becomes a player on the field with its own goal. Sarah's editors decided that their goal, social justice, was more important than the neutral rules of journalism, like objective truth.
And the moment the referee puts on a team jersey and starts trying to score a goal,
the game is over. The other team and half the audience in the stands, they riot. You cannot trust a referee who is actively trying to win the game.
And that's it. That's why trust in media, according to Gallup, is at 28%. And for Republicans, it's at 8%. It's not just fake news. It's that they perceive correctly that the institution is no longer a civil association. It's an enterprise association dedicated to a political project they don't agree with.
The betrayal is the switch from one to the other without telling anyone.
But if it's this obvious, if the betrayal is so blatant, why do people like Julian stay in that system? Why didn't Sarah leave her job earlier?
Betrayal blindness. It's another concept from Freud's research. It's a survival mechanism.
How does it work?
If you are totally dependent on the institution for your livelihood, your status, your community, or even your core identity, you literally cannot afford to see the betrayal.
Your brain just blocks it out.
Your brain blocks it out to protect you. You have to survive. So you normalize it. You tell yourself, well, every locker room is like this, or, well, every newsroom spins things a little bit. You create a bubble of denial to stay attached to the institution you need.
Until the cognitive dissonance becomes too loud to ignore, and you either break down or get out.
Exactly. And by then, the damage is often done.
So let's zoom out. We've covered a massive amount of ground here. We started with this simple dream of the ultimate peace. The desire for a world where we don't have to choose, where we're just safe and fed and told what to do.
And we spent the last hour detailing the bill that comes due for that peace.
Structurally, we saw through the story of Merrick and the work of James Scott that you can't have a legible, perfectly planned society without destroying the organic social underbrush that actually sustains human life.
You kill the forest just so you can count the trees.
Exactly. And then psychologically, we saw through Julian and Christopher Lasch that living in these hollowed out bureaucratic systems systems, it turns us into defensive narcissists.
We become symbolic capitalists, performing conformity, fighting for status in a brutal game of musical chairs, terrified of being the nail that sticks out.
And finally, institutionally, we saw through Sarah and the sports scandals that when these systems prioritize their utopian mission or just their own reputational survival over truth and the people they serve, they betray us all.
They turn from referees into predators, from civil associations into enterprise associations.
The common thread through all of it? It's the removal of the human element, isn't it?
The planner hates the messiness of the human. The narcissist hates the vulnerability of the human. The corrupt institution hates the unpredictability of the human.
But the human is the whole point.
The human is the whole point.
The source material we've looked at today really suggests that the most dangerous moment for any society isn't when it faces a crisis. It's when it convinces itself it has found the final, perfect solution to that crisis. When an institution claims it can eliminate all risk and all suffering if you just surrender your voice, remember? That transaction doesn't buy you peace. It only buys you silence. And in that silence, the machinery of the perfect world grinds on, indifferent to the people it was supposedly built to save.